This is CBC Vancouver News.
Thousands of BC port workers are still on strike.
Any disruption at this point can send off a ripple effect.
What that means for the Canadian economy. Days after going missing at a popular hiking spot, a BC teen is sharing her story of survival.
Folks who don't have that opportunity, their housing costs start, $700, $800, $900 a month.
For the first time in 15 years, BC's shelter allowance is going up. Why critics say it's still not enough. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Janella Hamilton. Thousands of unionized port workers in BC are still on strike after walking off the job on Canada Day, shutting down 30 ports, including the country's busiest in Vancouver. As Susanna De Silva reports, there are concerns if the strike continues for much longer, it could do serious damage to Canada's economy.
Most of the goods that pass through these registers arrived at one of BC's ports.
Staples for the Indian community that I know is like rice and lentils. They're all imported, they come by containers, and if it doesn't come out, prices will go high, there will be shortages.
Unwelcome challenges at a time when store owner Vanitha Kumar says inflation is already affecting customers.
With the interest rate hike and the gas prices, and now this again, how much can anybody absorb?
Okay, can I get 10 more guys to go to Centrum because we're going to need guys to man Main Street?
More than 7,000 workers at 30 BC ports walked off the job Saturday. The port says 1/3 of all of Canada's trade outside of North America moves through the Port of Vancouver. Some business groups are already calling on the federal government to step in.
A week is $5.5 billion of disrupted trade. We saw the fragility of our supply chains and our trade corridors, and any disruption at this point can send off a ripple effect.
People shouldn't be panicking.
But this professor who studies supply chains believes the strike would have to drag on a few weeks for major impact.
There is a mechanism to legislate them back to work. This is probably a 6-year deal, so it's not the end of the world if it takes a bit of time to find the right deal between the parties.
Canada's Minister of Labour said in a statement, "We are not looking past the bargaining table because the best deals are made at the table." Federal mediators continue to support the parties in their negotiations.
The federal government must stay out of our business.
And a warning from the union if the government position were to change.
There will never be labor peace on the waterfront. This deal must be reached at the collective bargaining table.
Both sides say they expect negotiations to continue. Susanna De Silva, CBC News, Vancouver.
Okanagan emergency officials now say a wildfire that burned just kilometers from Kelowna's downtown lakeshore is now under control. As Tom Popick reports, it could be days until evacuation alerts and a local state of emergency is lifted. RCMP say Knox Mountain Park will remain closed until at least Tuesday.
Kelowna Fire Department engines are still rushing up Knox Mountain.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Even while BC wildfire crews wrap up their suppression efforts, the 6.5-hectare blaze is now under control.
But it's not out yet. We still got some work to do getting into the black, dealing with some of the hot spots. But as far as the perimeter goes, we've got a guard 99% done, and yeah, we're really happy with the situation right now. Forest
and scrub in the urban park are still scarred by red bands of fire retardant. What a difference a day makes. Just 24 hours earlier, tankers were bombing a growing blaze just kilometers from Kelowna's downtown lakeshore. Helicopters dropping buckets of water, 4 dozen firefighters on the line, all battling flames driven by strong winds. A plume of smoke visible throughout the city. As thousands gathered to celebrate a holiday, they watched this emergency response unfold.
As far as a high-profile fire in Kelowna, Canada Day, downtown full of people, fire goes off at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It doesn't get any more high-profile and dangerous than that for our guys.
Clearly, it was a very quick response from all sides.
The BC Wildfire Service credits the public for calling in, sharing shots of the fire on social media and the BC Wildfire app, giving crews instant insight into the blaze even before they arrived.
We did get a very large amount of calls. Obviously, there was a lot of people out on the lake in West Kelowna, downtown Kelowna, and all of those calls help us make those response decisions that much quicker.
But residents in nearby neighborhoods are still waiting. Some 420 homes were evacuated Saturday afternoon. Residents were allowed to return in the evening, but an alert remains in place. That and a local state of emergency is expected to continue as a precaution until the fire is finally stamped out. It's the third time in 25 years fire has forced Wayne Stan to flee his home.
It's a fact of life in the Okanagan. I mean, there's not much you can do. It's tinder dry here. That's just the way it is.
While traffic is now reopened through this subdivision, Knox Mountain Park itself remains off limits to the public.
Yeah, it's still closed.
Anyone caught biking or hiking through one of the region's most popular parks faces a $500 fine. Conditions remain dry and hazardous. Investigators are now trying to determine the exact cause of the fire, but officials already say it was human-caused. Tom Popick, CBC News, Kelowna.
BC's Forestry watchdog says major changes to the industry are needed to reduce the risk of catastrophic wildfires, and maintaining the status quo threatens life and land in the province.
We're really calling for action by government of BC to develop a vision and an action plan to change forest management practices and correct this situation that we're faced with.
He says conventional forest management has undone much of the landscape's resilience, and current wildfire risk mitigation focuses on areas near communities but leaves the wider forest landscape severely vulnerable, like the massive Donny Creek wildfire in northeastern BC and the devastating losses in Lytton 2 years ago. A BC teen who was missing for nearly 54 hours in the backcountry at Golden Ears Park is sharing her story of survival in a letter. On Thursday, the 16-year-old walked out of the woods, reuniting with her family. Now, as Benit Braich reports, the Langley resident is giving her account of how she managed to stay alive and what trauma is left.
In a letter, 16-year-old Esther Wang says she was focusing on the steep terrain ahead of her when she realized she had become separated from the other 3 people in her group on Tuesday. The details described in this letter, which the Canadian Armed Forces Regional Cadet Support Unit confirms is from Wang, who has been part of the cadets for a few years. The letter says after getting lost, she tried to find her group, but tripped and fell to a flatter part of the mountain and wasn't able to easily climb back up. She says, scared and lonely, I curled into a ball as I tried to stay as calm as possible. Wang says she heard the whistles of rescuers, but couldn't find them. I tried to flash my headlight towards the spotlights. However, they did not notice my desperate plea for help. I was filled with hopelessness and fear, but I knew I could not give up. She says she had food packed and survived by refilling her water bottle in a river where she spent her first night alone. According to the letter, the next morning she tried to climb back up the mountain, but slipped and fell, this time hitting her head on the rocks. Wang says she could hear rescue helicopters above her and the sound of dogs barking. She says she shook trees and made noises in an attempt to get rescuers' attention, but her efforts failed. And because there is no service where she was, police say they were not able to ping her phone. She spent her second night under a tree at the top of a mountain peak, where she says temperatures got quite cold. On day 3, while looking through old photos on her digital camera, she recognized a picture of a snowy peak she had passed, and this gave her some sense of direction, so she started to retrace her steps down the mountain. The letter says Wang started noticing hiking markers, which gave her some relief. I noticed pink tape on some trees around me, and my hopes soared high. Eventually, Wang reached a beach that had signs directing her to a parking lot. At this point, she says she felt dizzy, but knew she couldn't give up. Around 9:15 Thursday night, Wang walked herself out of the woods to a parking lot where her parents were waiting for search updates. Wang and her family declined an interview request and are asking for privacy. Beyond the bruises, she says the experience has left her with physical and mental trauma. Wang credits the survival skills she learned through the cadet program for helping save her life.
These skills include building different types of shelters, water collection techniques, first aid training.
In the letter, Wang thanks the dozens of volunteers and rescue teams involved in the days-long search efforts, saying she is forever grateful. Benny Brach, CBC News, Vancouver.
For the first time in 16 years, BC's housing allowance for people on income and disability assistance is going up. People who qualify will soon receive $500 a month to go toward housing costs. But as Yasmin Ranea reports, advocates and people with disabilities say it's still not enough.
Isaac Nelson's whole life changed last summer after a medical emergency impacting his nervous system made him reliant on a wheelchair.
Before June 7th, I'd never been in the hospital a day in my life.
The 62-year-old previously had a life full of adventure, traveling to 40 countries and even flew commercial helicopters. After the incident, he could no longer work in his labor-intensive job and had to move into a wheelchair-accessible building. He depends on a shelter allowance from the province to cover his housing.
It's very hard to live on what I'm getting, but I've had to learn how to budget better and be more careful with the money that I do have.
But soon he may feel some relief, with the province's shelter rate increasing to $500 a month starting July 19th. That's up from $375. It's the first increase in more than 15 years.
I don't know if it's going to really support a lot of people, because as you know, rent prices in Vancouver are obscene. So, but it's a start.
Organizations that support people with disabilities agree.
It's just not enough to actually cover the needs for folks who are looking for housing in this community.
He says there isn't enough affordable, subsidized housing to meet the demand.
Some of it does exist, but there's just not enough of it. Folks who don't have that opportunity, their housing costs start, $700, $800, $900 a month. A lot of times utilities on top of that.
Advocates say the shelter allowance needs to keep up with inflation and soaring housing costs. The province says the funding change will benefit almost 160,000 people across BC, and 17,000 new homes funded by BC Housing are underway. Adding at least 5% will be wheelchair accessible.
I hope that the shelter rate goes up higher for people, because they don't have to feel like they're under stress all the time.
Nelson says he will have to use his savings to help him get by, but worries for the many people who have nothing. Yasmin Ranea, CBC News, Vancouver.
A BC-made harm reduction tool aimed at preventing overdose deaths is being installed in more than 2,000 SROs in supportive housing units across the province. We got a look at how the device works and why it's so vital. With a click of a button, this device could save lives.
I'm going to use my substance, and so I press start.
It's called Lifeguard Lite, an innovative new tool that allows residents living in SROs or social housing to set a timer before using illicit drugs alone in their room. Once the countdown is complete, residents hit "I'm okay," but if that button isn't pressed in time, an alert will be sent to building staff and 911.
These people are getting help immediately.
Sinclair says as a former drug user and SRO manager, she knows the benefits of a device like this. She remembers what she calls a traumatic day in 2021 when she went to check on a resident named Joy Phelps, knocked on her door, and no one answered.
I believe 10,000% that if Joy would have had this in her room, she wouldn't have died.
Data from the BC Coroner Service shows more than 12,000 people have been killed by toxic drugs since 2016. Many of them dying inside shelters, SROs, hotels, or supportive housing. 61% of people who died during the pandemic were using alone.
Often people, even if they have a safe consumption site to use a substance, want to be alone in their room, and there's privacy and there's safety.
Her organization runs 14 supportive housing buildings in Vancouver. She says there is at least one overdose death per month.
The overdose crisis has taken a truly enormous toll.
Lifeguard first developed a similar phone app in 2020. Since then, 69 lives have been saved through the program. But not everyone who lives here has a phone, which is why these wall-mounted devices are so critical.
We're saving people's lives, and it's peace of mind for staff and residents.
Right now, devices are being installed at Vancouver's Portland Hotel, on Vancouver Island, and in the interior. The province says it is aware of the Lifeguard Lite device, but did not say whether it plans to pay to install them in all public housing units. Sinclair says with the unregulated drug supply becoming increasingly more toxic and unpredictable, devices are needed in every unit across the province.
Every time that button's pressed and someone doesn't die, that's a family member who doesn't have to get that phone call. That's a staff member who doesn't have to stand at that door and, call the coroner.
The Vancouver film studio behind movies like Deadpool and shows like The Flash and Yellow Jackets has been sold to Los Angeles-based company Hackman Capital Partners.
We felt that we either needed to grow or to hand it off to an owner that had a bit more international reach and could take it to the next level.
It's a space to celebrate Indigenous culture and share knowledge. After the break, we'll tell you about a youth-led powwow in Mission. Stay with us. From family-friendly festivities to a citizenship ceremony welcoming newcomers to our country. Here are some highlights from this weekend's Canada Day celebrations in Vancouver.
I think Canada Day is a great opportunity to show that we're all one community geographically, that despite whatever we might hate or disagree about, we love each other and we love this country.
Hopes for Canada, I guess more inclusivity, diversity.
I'd say more sports, more UFC, more NBA, more football, everything.
My hope for Canada is that they win the championships, Toronto Raptors.
There you go.
Yeah, Raptors!
I think that we are so lucky to live in Canada, and I'm just so grateful to be here. I'm so grateful we live here, and we can all be so grateful for the peace, the freedom, the standard of living, and of course we've got problems, but what an amazing, beautiful place to live.
I swear that I will be faithful.
Canada is such an amazing country already. I think it should be just the way it is, honestly. That's why I chose to be here, and I chose to work with immigration as well. So it's such a pleasure to help people immigrating to Canada. Yeah, it's just I have no words to express how happy I am.
Happy Canada Day!
While much of the country spent the weekend marking Canada Day, several Indigenous communities came together to celebrate and support Indigenous youth through a powwow. Our Sarab Sandhu was there.
The stage is set for the second annual Reclaiming Youth Powwow, a youth-led event aimed at reclaiming Indigenous culture.
Everything from applying for the grant money to hiring the youth to running the projects to coordinating the powwow is all run by people who are 26 and under.
Sunshine says the powwow hopes to combat youth substance use, homelessness, and suicide through culture, ceremony, and tradition.
What we have here today is a mix of what I would say thousands of dialects of language, thousands of different cultural protocol and practices all mixing into one was what we call powwow.
This year's event being held at the former St. Mary's Indian Residential School in Mission, one of the last residential schools to close in BC.
The grounds that it's on, the old St. Mary's Residential School, in a way they're reclaiming our most precious resource, that's our children.
For Jonathan McHugh, it's a chance to reconnect with his roots.
And it's good to see gathering, interconnecting, networking. It's nice to know that there's people out there willing to transfer Indigenous knowledge onto those who, like myself, who've been assimilated.
This couple brings their grandchildren in hopes of teaching them about Indigenous culture and history.
It's so different from when I was growing up, so different. And I couldn't celebrate it more. I just really want my grandchildren to know a different way than what I knew.
The powwow is also an opportunity for young Indigenous entrepreneurs like Francesca Amin to showcase their craft.
I'm just so proud to be here. I love this day. I'm proud that people love what I do.
It's important that our young Indigenous youth know that these spaces exist and they exist for them, and that it's up to us to lead these spaces. It's for them to celebrate their culture, for them to come and not worry about how they have to behave or how they have to act.
Event organizers say they expect more than 5,000 people to attend the 3-day celebration. That wraps up Sunday. Sarab Sandhu, CBC News, Mission.
Here we have a live shot of the Port of Vancouver. I'll have your full forecast coming up next.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
CBC Vancouver is the premier media partner of the 2023 Surrey Fusion Festival, July 22nd and 23rd. Visit the festive cultural pavilions, enjoy free live music and family activities. And the 13th annual Indian Summer Festival takes place July 6th to the 16th. The festival's powerful 10-event lineup speaks to the theme of interdependence. Tickets at indiansummerfest.ca.
All right, it is time now to take a look at your forecast. Let's begin with the current temperatures around the regions. 16 in Squamish, 18 in West Vancouver, 18 at the airport as well, 18 over in Pitt Meadows, and White Rock is sitting around 16 degrees at the current moment. Let's take a peek at tomorrow's forecast. Starting up in Dees Lake, 24 and sunny for you tomorrow. Prince George, 22 with a 60% chance of showers in the afternoon and some local smoke, so be aware of that. Over in Port Hardy, 19 degrees with mainly sunny. Victoria, 24 and lots of sun around. Cranbrook, 26 with a few clouds and mostly sunny. Finishing off with our 5-day forecast here in Metro Vancouver. Lots of sun and heat across the week. 24 for tomorrow, 26 on Tuesday and Wednesday and even Thursday, and a tiny bit cooler on Friday with 25. The endangered southern resident killer whale population has grown by 2. The Center for Whale Research in Washington State says a pair of new calves who were spotted during a survey of a group of whales in the Strait of Georgia on Friday. The center says both calves were very active, social, and healthy. Researchers estimate both calves are about 2 months old. That is your late news for this Sunday. Thank you so much for watching. For news at any hour, visit our website, cbc.ca/bc. Have a great long weekend.